Hi, I'm Marie. Welcome to Marie's Kitchen. I'm so glad you're here. Today we're making a Dutch apple pie. A Dutch apple pie is where you have your bottom crust, just a traditional crust, then you have your wonderful apple filling in the center, and then on top is either a streusel or crumb type topping. So you get all the deliciousness of apple pie plus this delicious streusel on top, and I love this pie. So I'm really excited to share it with you. Let's get started. Okay, let's go through the ingredients real quick. For the filling, you'll need apples, of course. I love to use Granny Smith for apple pie. Has a wonderful taste, also wonderful texture. So Granny Smith is definitely my top choice. I do recommend getting bigger apples. These are tiny little Granny Smith, and so you end up having to peel a lot more apples, which just takes some more work. So if possible, get Granny Smith, but get the larger ones if you have them. If you don't have Granny Smith, you can use another apple. These are Sweeties here, and this is a Macintosh. You can also mix up the apples. I don't usually bake with Macintosh, but I'm going to throw some in just for some variety of texture and flavor, which will really give the pie some depth. So you can mix up your apples, or if you just want to use one and keep it simple, I would go with just the Granny Smith, but the larger size. Now for the other ingredients, we're going to use 3/4 cup brown sugar, 1/4 cup flour, and this is for the apple filling, and it serves as a thickener. You could also use gluten-free flour, or you can also use cornstarch. So you are going to need some sort of thickener though, otherwise you tend to have like a real soupy pie. So I do recommend the 1/4 cup flour. We've got a 1/2 tablespoon of ground cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, ground nutmeg, and a pinch of salt. So that's for our apple filling. Then for the crumb topping, we're going to use 1 cup of flour, 1/4 cup brown sugar, 1/4 cup white sugar, and butter, along with a pinch of salt in the topping as well. Finally, you'll also need 1 pie crust rolled out into a pie pan. I use a 9 to 9.5 inch or 10-inch pie pan. I have mine actually currently in the freezer. I like to keep my crust in the freezer. You can wrap it with some saran wrap, keep it in the freezer, and it will keep it for a long time. And also the freezing the crust helps it hold its shape when you bake it. So if you ever baked a pie and the crust starts to kind of sink down when you're baking it, kind of melt, freezing the pie crust before will solve that problem. So keep that in mind. I'll grab it when we put the pie together, but right now my pie crust rolled out into a pie plate is in the freezer. And if you do want to see how I make my homemade pie crust and a bunch of details about how to perfect your homemade pie crust, I do have videos on that. Check out my homemade pie crust video, and that has all your answers. And of course you can always comment here on this video. I would love to answer your questions. So now let's peel the apples. If you make apple pies often, or if you just love really cool kitchen gadgets, I want to tell you about this apple peeler and corer. It is so amazing. I love everything about it. It is so easy to use. I'm going to show you here how it works. And I did get this one at Williams-Sonoma. There are some that I've gotten that attach to your counter, and I had one of those that broke immediately and I returned it. So I do highly recommend this particular one, and I can put a link in the recipe to it if you want to check it out. So we're going to pull the peeler back, then you're going to insert the apple right here, and then there's a little knob here that we kind of lets this fall back down, and then we're going to run it through. And this is peeling, slicing, and coring the apple all at once. Then we'll just kind of pull off the apple like that. And you can see here the core comes right out. This apple is peeled, cored. All I do then is just cut this apple right through like that, and you've got these apple slices peeled and cored. So, I mean, isn't this amazing? It is such a great tool, one of my favorite kitchen gadgets of all time. So I'm going to grab my bowl of apples. I started to peel some earlier just to kind of speed things up. I've got about, looks like about 6 cups here, so we'll add a few more, and I'll show you this cool gadget as we go. Grab our apple. I'm going to do it this way, so hopefully y'all can see. So you push this lever down, pull this back, then the apple, you just kind of center it right there on this little thing. And then we're just going to turn, and this is coring it while this is peeling it, and it's also slicing it. Such a great gadget. Even if you don't make apple pies, I mean, having this for just like apple slices, my kids love it, although you do need to be careful, this little things can be sharp, but it's just a great all-around gadget. So, highly recommend that one. Now we'll just put our apple slices right here in the bowl, and I'll do a few more. Now that we have our apples peeled, we're going to add the sugar, flour, cinnamon, and nutmeg. And that is super simple. You're just going to add the brown sugar, then the flour, then the cinnamon, and the nutmeg. Since I did peel these apples a little bit earlier and I didn't want them to turn really brown, I squeezed a little lemon juice on them, so you can do that. Granny Smith apples have plenty of tart flavor, so you don't really need the lemon juice. Often lemon juice is added in pies when you sort of want to balance out the sweetness, but Granny Smith apples, which I'm using, are so pleasantly tart you don't need the lemon juice. Now I've tossed it a little bit with the spoon. I'm going to use my hands and kind of make sure they're covered here. Okay, this looks great, smells incredible. I can already feel them starting to get nice and kind of juicy. You might want to use a bigger bowl than I am right now because it's getting a little crowded, but that's all good. Okay, there are our apples, nice and tossed. I'm going to rinse my hands and then we'll start on the crumb topping. Now for the crumb topping, we are going to use a food processor. You can use your fingers if you prefer, or a pastry cutter also to make this crumb topping. I find the food processor is the easiest and fastest. We're going to start with the 1 cup flour, then 1/4 cup brown sugar, 1/4 cup white sugar, and I'm going to get a little bit of salt over here, a nice pinch there. Then we'll give that a quick blend just to mix everything up. Do the pulse. Very good. Now we'll add cold unsalted butter. You want to use cold butter. That's important in this recipe because when you're blending it up, if it's too warm and soft, it'll just kind of turn into a mush. And what you want is crumbs. So to get the crumbs, you really need the cold butter. So keep the butter in the fridge until you are ready to use it. And then I'm just going to slice it into about 8 tablespoons. And we're going to throw that in while it's nice and cold. Pop the lid on and give that a pulse. Okay, that looks good. We've got a nice crumb topping there. Looks great. We're just going to move that to a bowl, and you'll want to refrigerate that until you're ready to use it. Otherwise, again, it'll get too soft and won't hold up as a crumb topping. So I'm going to move this to a bowl and then to the refrigerator. Now it's time to assemble the pie. So I got out my crust that I had in the freezer. It's here in a pie plate. Just going to unwrap it. This is a homemade crust. It's an all butter homemade pie crust, which is wonderful, and do check out my video on homemade pie crust if you want to try your own, or you can always buy one from the grocery store and put it into your pie plate and keep things simple. So I do love the pie crust from Trader Joe's. I find it has a really good flavor, at least for store-bought crust. So we'll start with our pie crust in the pie plate. Now we'll add our apples. And you can see there is quite a bit of juice coming out with them, and that is just fine. And don't these fit nicely? Okay, we'll kind of press these in. Now we'll add our crumb topping to the apples. We're just going to sprinkle that around. Lovely. Doesn't this look gorgeous? A nice big crumb topping on top, nice and full. Still a rustic crust, which is so beautiful. And this is ready to go in the oven. We're preheating the oven to 425 degrees. And I am going to bake this on a baking sheet. You always want to bake a pie on a baking sheet, especially fruit pies. They can bubble over, and so you don't want to be having to clean up your oven. It really takes the fun out of making a pie if you're having to clean up your oven. So always use a baking sheet, and I'm using a parchment paper underneath, so in case it does bubble over, this one most likely will not, but if it does, it's an easy cleanup. And then another thing you do want to be careful of when you're baking your pie is always hold with two hands. There have been more than one occasion where I will kind of try to balance it with one hand, and the pie is heavy. The pie is heavy with the pie plate, and if it starts to slip, you'll lose your pie. And I have done that, so learn from my mistakes. When the oven preheats at 425, we're going to bake it for about 25 minutes. And the reason I like to bake it for 25 minutes at 425, which is a really high temperature, is that will crisp the crust. Crisp the bottom of the crust and also the edges so they stay in place. So always, I really do recommend when you make a pie, go ahead and start at 425 degrees, a high temperature, to get a nice crispy crust that stays in place. Then we're going to reduce the heat and bake it for the duration. Okay, let's get this in the oven. Okay, so the pie has been baking for about 45 minutes at 425 degrees. You can see it looks great here. One thing I did want to show you though is it's starting to get a little bit overcooked here on the edge, and that happens sometimes. What you can do to prevent your outer crust from burning is you can take a little tin foil and just lay it across the top. Very easy. That will allow the pie to continue to cook but will prevent browning on the crust. Or what you can also do is, and this one's hot right now, but this is a pie shield, and I love this. If you make pies often, this is a great little tool to have. It acts just like the foil does, but it fits right around the edge of the pie. So now I'm going to put it back in the oven at 375 degrees, about 35 to 40 minutes. And what you're waiting for is a nice, of course, golden crust and golden top, but also you want to see kind of a bubbling filling. And the other thing we'll do is poke a toothpick in and make sure the apples feel soft. So about 35 minutes, maybe 40, maybe 45. You want to get those apples nice and cooked so the filling is nice and thick, and then also the apples are soft. So back in the oven at 375 for about 35 minutes. Okay, the pie is done, and it looks incredible. It smells so good in the house. Now we're going to let this cool for about 30 to 45 minutes, and then I'm going to drizzle with some salted caramel sauce. You'll just do kind of horizontal and then vertical, and then you have this just rustic, beautiful decoration that adds flavor as well to the pie. And that is optional. This will be delicious just as is, but if you want to add a little something special, you can add the salted caramel on top. Real quick, we'll grab a toothpick and just sort of insert that in and make sure it slides in real easy. Oh yes, into those apples. Really nice and soft. There's really no resistance there, and so that is a great sign. We know those apples are cooked. Thanks so much for joining us on Marie's Kitchen. Today we made this easy and incredibly delicious Dutch apple pie with the pastry crust on the bottom, delicious apple filling with Granny Smith apples, and then a crumb topping on top. It was easy to throw together, and I'm really excited for you to try this one. If you get a chance to try it, let us know in the comments. We would love to hear from you. Be sure to hit that like button, give us a thumbs up. We so appreciate your likes, and of course so does YouTube. Also, if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe. I've got lots more videos with easy recipes just like this coming out every week, and I don't want you to miss any of them. For this recipe and more, check out my website, mariesaba.com. You can go there to the recipes tab, and all of my recipes are there, and you can print them out in a nice PDF, which you can then put in a binder and make your own Marie's Kitchen cookbook. We are doing the same thing, and I'm really excited for you to have all these recipes in one place. My goal is to give you some really easy recipes that turn out delicious every single time, so you can build some confidence in the kitchen and feel really inspired to share good food with people that you love. From my kitchen to yours, thank you. Now that we have the apples peeled, we'll add our, now that we add wonderfully golden it is. Oops.